Welcome to Lift Talk, where we talk about lifting. This is episode 2, and I sat down with Matt Bartholomew to talk about what it takes to be a great coach and what it takes to be a great lifter, and whether these skills overlap at all. We went on many tangents throughout the chat about the powerlifting process, from programming to mindset to finding balance in the sport. Enjoy the episode. If you could play any sport professionally, and bear in mind, take into account like length of career, amount of money you would make,
Yep.
toll on the body, etc., which would you pick?
Probably the sport that I came from, rugby union, but probably more specifically now that it's getting more popular, rugby sevens. I definitely enjoyed rugby sevens a lot.
Would you not be worried about the old CTE,
What's the CTE?
the brain trauma disease?
Oh, no, I mean, like, I wasn't playing front row or anything. I think that's where you get a lot of that. So as a more like backline player or even in sevens, it's just like less common to get concussions and that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, it's pretty open. What position did you play growing up?
I was like inside center, outside center kind of situation. Yeah.
Same as me. So I obviously didn't bring you here to talk about what sport you would play, but I brought you here to talk about yourself being an elite coach, an elite athlete. And in my mind, those two skill sets don't overlap a whole lot, but you've been able to make it work. So, like, let's start from the athlete side. What are the things, the characteristics that you think make up a good athlete?
Particularly in powerlifting.
Yeah, in powerlifting, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Well, I guess you could go any sport really.
Yeah, I think there's probably overlap to other sports, but where I think there are, important factors that are different in powerlifting is probably one of the things is probably patience. It is probably one of those, what is one of those sports that requires you to apply to the sport for a little bit longer to your peak. Um, Even look at something like athletics. By the time you're 30, for the most part, there are extenuating individuals who can go against that. By the time you're 30, you're fairly well peaked. And when you look towards powerlifting, you're really just getting going when it comes to peak performance on the world stage when you turn 30. So I think that the patience level, if someone gets into the sport when they're 20, well, all of a sudden you're looking at a decade at least
Yeah, yeah.
of work. So I think that's definitely an element, patience.
Would you not say that, like, use athletics as an example? Would you not say that, like, people start training for athletics when they're like 10?
May well,
So
may
like
well.
that 30-year peak is like still 20 years of training.
Yeah, I think that there are definitely those sort of situations. But if you maybe take the example of someone getting into the sport, roughly when they leave school, maybe they're going to do a little bit of it. Like when you're in school, you play many sports, for example.
Yep.
And then you might specialize when you become an adult. So let's say, 20s, that kind of entry. You've got 5 to 10 years to really get after it in athletics. Whereas to compare to powerlifting, it might be nearly double that. And hey, you still need patience to do really well in athletics. But I think that particularly the amount of people we see burn out of the sport, the amount of really good lifters who do well when they're young, relatively speaking, as juniors, and maybe just don't have that ability. Maybe an element of it is patience. Maybe an element of it is other factors, but I think patience is definitely one really important factor to be a great athlete in powerlifting.
Definitely agree. What else do you think that? What else do you think differentiates like being a great athlete from being a great coach? Like, what are some of the skills that you need? Because I would say you need patience as well to be a good coach.
Definitely.
In like learning about someone, learning how they work and how to get them results. What about stuff that's like more specific to an athlete?
Yeah, so I think that the patience element when it comes to coaching maybe just presents in a different way. Um, but I have to say that in powerlifting, to be a really great athlete, um, firstly, it's gonna start at the genetic level, and you're not able to control that. So if we just be real for a second, being a high performer in powerlifting is mostly already decided for you when you enter the sport, and that's just something that you have to be willing to accept. So if becoming great is more defined as an individual thing based on your potential, then it does come down to what we talk about a lot, meat and potatoes, which means pretty much time and effort, being able to do the majority of the things well for a long period of time. And that's what I mean by the patience is that sustained effort.
Yeah.
And how you want to describe that, I guess you could do in a variety of different ways. But the positive that comes out of that is accessible to everyone. Um, you you have this sort of like genetic ability, and if you put time and effort in, you're going to find out what you have. And where you land, like I said, is mostly out of your control, which is kind of freeing in a sense. That that end result is decided for you in a sense when you come into the sport, which is why I ask to come over to the coaching side. I ask a lot of my lifters and even myself, someone who, is aspiring to the world stage and doing well on the world stage in time, that I'm also able to suspend my expectations that that may not happen, and that I'm still going to be doing those inputs and getting reward out of the sport regardless of actually reaching that pinnacle.
Yep.
And so I think that's something really important to recognize in powerlifting, and something that is equally important to even make it there.
Yep.
Otherwise, if we have this sort of starry eyed approach and we never actually see our own potential because we get so sick of not reaching those really high goals that are kind of like arbitrary in nature, that's a roundabout way of me defining what a good athlete looks like, and an athlete that can last as well.
Yeah. So someone who like has the blinders on a little bit and stays in their own lane, not too concerned about what that, pinnacle is, and instead tries to find their own pinnacle and like reach their own peak,
Yep.
which may not actually mean reaching like the peak of the sport.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like not looking at the thing helps you achieve the thing, or not recognizing the thing right now helps you to achieve the thing. And you have to set goals, be that, shorter, medium, or long term goals. But if I was to say to someone who fresh walks into the gym as, let's say, an 18, 19, or 20-year-old is just starting to lift weights and says, I want to be the world champion, would I be making that the cherry or the carrot that they're trying to chase every single day on the way to that? Or would that actually be really disappointing when their first comp is nowhere near world champion status? When their first nationals is nowhere near world champion status? When their eighth nationals is getting there but still far away, and that person does have the potential, but it's going to take them 11 years. Will they make that 11th year if that is all they're focusing on? I think that's unlikely.
So how would you reframe that situation for them then?
They have to break it up. So something that I talk about a lot is zooming in or zooming out. And that's probably a skill set that really good athletes in general have. But again, because of the time period in powerlifting that really good powerlifters have, is when things are going really well, when they're going smoothly, when you're PRing, when you're having good comp days, being able to zoom in on that, enjoy that, and squeeze that enjoyment for all it's worth to kind of fuel the next stages is wonderful. And then when things maybe are going poorly, which, let's be frank, you speak to anyone who's been in the sport for longer than a few years, they've had periods of plateau, they've had periods of injury or pain, they've struggled to get things moving, and you have to be able to zoom out in those moments, understand the bigger picture, and let those times sort of ride out and let your consistency get you through those times. And so that's probably that would be hitting the nail on the head for me as to describing a really good athlete, is being able to really capitalize on those good phases, and then being able to zoom out and let it simmer, like let it cook a bit, and let yourself move through those worser phases so that you can find those good phases again. And that is what we see a lot of. And people say like progress is not linear. Well, that's a fairly good description of it. Progress is not linear. It kind of have these jumps and juts along the
Hmm.
way, but you have to be able to facilitate those juts in those plateau periods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in those plateau periods, what are some kind of strategies that you would utilize with your clients? Like, are you saying, okay, maybe we're not going to look to peak for a competition, but we're going to work on other qualities? Is that something? How would you approach
I
that?
think it's so individual. I have clients who just love to train with specificity and love to train how the sport of powerlifting is structured. And as an athlete, I'm one of those people who, more often than not, is quite happy training powerlifting all of the time. And so I do think that there is that element of some individuals who really love powerlifting, yet don't always love training powerlifting year round, which is kind of a funny one.
Hmm.
And something that I used to struggle to wrap my head around, and where I lacked empathy and flexibility as a coach, I'd kind of be like, what do you mean you don't want to train like a powerlifter? You've chosen this sport. Don't you enjoy it? And what I've come to realize is that is just differences in individuals. And that just because I, as an athlete, this is where that sort of separating athlete and coach comes in. As an athlete, I love SBD days. I love, 2, 3 hour sessions. And a lot of my clients just think that that is the worst possible training existence most of the time. They're
Would
willing to do it in periods where it's going to really help them. But is it training that they're really going to like get up and get
Yeah,
after?
you're looking at one right now.
Yeah, I know, bruh. And so, there's classic cases where it also depends like what your life looks like. Even for people who treat the sport as they're an athlete in the sport and they're aspiring to the highest possible standard, it almost never their full time situation. They have a job, they have families, they have kids, they have other things that they need to manage their time around powerlifting. Now, we have the luxury in powerlifting that the training inputs are relatively small compared to other sports, that for the most part, if you do 4 to 6 training sessions of 1 to 2 hours, you're fulfilling as much as you can fulfill in the training stimulus side of things. At some point, you reach the peak of that inverted U, and I talk about inverted U hypothesis so often because it applies to a lot of things. You reach that peak, and more is not better, and oftentimes it's worse. And again, you're looking at someone who's experienced that with injury. And you have to go through sometimes those situations to kind of learn where those boundaries are. But the point being, to come back to the question, how are we going to facilitate that ability to zoom out? And it might be distract the person. So it might be training that is different to powerlifting that enables you to work on other qualities. And there are so many other qualities that contribute to that peaking of strength. And I think being able to do that as a coach is an extremely valuable skill set. Again, because I can count on one hand, you can count on one hand the lifters who were first lifting when you first competed who are still in the game. And is that because they don't like powerlifting? Probably not for the most part. It might well be, and this is just in my experience, it might well be that they were just pressed too hard, too quickly, and tried to squeeze that sponge too hard, too quickly. It is a slow squeeze sport, and that's what I was sort of saying at the start about patience. It's like Darcy, for example, competed this weekend, one of my lifters, and we were able to put him forward into a comp where he came out with kilos in reserve. It's going to really facilitate the next prep. And this is an example of a strategy of helping someone to be excited for the process ongoing. I've also made the error as a coach of pushing lifters too hard in local comps and their morale being extremely poor for the following comps. And I can see they're teeter tottering on that boundary of if they're going to stay or if they're going to go. So that is so individual, but there's just a couple examples there, varying training and focusing on other qualities. And then how you actually approach the season of a powerlifter and how you can keep someone interested, engaged, and excited, like Darcy, who's just had a PR total day on the platform with room, and he's so excited to get back into pretty specific training for the state championships, for example. So it varies, but being engaged as a coach, you're going to know what makes that person tick and how you're going to help them to get to the other side of that kind of shitty period in time.
Yep, yep. I want to say a couple of things that you mentioned in there. You mentioned that there's lifters who don't want to train SBD year round, and I honestly think this comes back to the whole patience thing, because the reason they like the SBD is because it's the lift in which they can lift the most weight, and it's like a test for them. It's like a, hey, I can squat X number, bench X number, deadlift X number. But when that requires so much patience, and it requires you, if you do it year round, to like take your losses sometimes and not always see progress, the reason why those kind of lifters do better with bringing it back after a period of building through non-specific means is because when they get back to it, they know they're going to PR, they know they're going to be stronger.
They've raised the ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was what I think the biggest difference between, well, the biggest characteristic that athletes have that coaches probably shouldn't have is actually selfishness. Being able to say, hey, this is my journey, and I need to sacrifice certain things in my life to achieve these goals. Whereas like that's got nothing to do with coaching. What can you talk about selfishness for a little bit?
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. And I think that has been probably the hardest hat to take on and off as a coach and athlete is, for example, I might be, you know, pursuing a training session, and be it check-ins, be it relationships outside of coaching or whatever, and being able to express that selfishness in training to get the desired outcome is great. And I can do those things and apply strategies to do those things. But then being able to shift gears into a coaching situation, you're right. It's exactly the opposite situation where you have to have that empathy, you have to listen, you have to consider other people, stop thinking about yourself. So frankly, it's quite hard. Um, but over time, obviously, the strategies to kind of flick in and out of these hats get better and better. But yeah, I would agree with you there that they are they are completely countering one another. The selfishness required to do really, really well. And I've even experienced this, over the last couple of years of having had an injury and being kind of floating in the sport somewhat. I have actually had to down regulate my selfishness and my drive to stay in the sport because I wouldn't have even seen a return from those things at the time. So I've had to dial those things down because I haven't been in a position to even use those factors. So it's something to be aware of because if you're just an athlete and you have another job outside of coaching, turn that dial up when you can. Because truthfully, I think that you do get out what you put in when it comes to powerlifting. I think that the bandwidth in difference is a little bit less than other sports again because it's so accessible in like hours per week for the average Joe. But I do think that there is like a layer and level to the inputs for like your weekend warrior, your semi-serious, you're really serious, and then someone who wants to be all time in the sport. Given that, like we said, they have the predisposition from a genetic standpoint. Um, so I think being really real with yourself. How hard do I want to apply to this thing, and then to be able to match that with a level of selfishness. Otherwise, if you are unable to tick those boxes really consistently, again, because if we zoom out to like 10 years, we have to be able to zoom out to that the everyday situation kind of compounds into that 10 years. So yeah, very necessary.
Yeah. Okay, so let's flip over to characteristics that coaches require. What do you think is, some skill sets that coaches need to have that don't cross over into the athlete side of things?
I think one of the biggest things is one that I mentioned just before that but didn't go into too much, which is empathy. And again, this is something that has developed a lot in me as a coach uh, because for a long time, as I was becoming a better coach, I was treating all my athletes like little me's, uh, both in how I approach training, how I approach pain or discomfort, how I approach difficult training, how I approach elements of nutrition and recovery and sacrifice. And I've developed this empathy, this ability to listen and genuinely listen and not just kind of like hear the words, but go, okay, that's what this person's experience is. Let me respond and help them to optimize that situation. That has been one of the biggest things. So let's say empathy and critical thinking.
Hmm.
Those two things combined are a mean combo because it enables you to truly understand the situation that person is in, understand the things that they are saying, let them sit, and then come back to them with a really great strategy that's going to help them get a great result, regardless of the fact that those inputs might not be optimal.
Hmm.
So I think that's been a really wonderful development for me
Yeah.
as a coach and a big difference between the athlete side because when I lacked that empathy, I might have a report from a lifter of some pain they were experiencing or discomfort. Maybe I'd experienced something similar in the past, and that because they were speaking about it in a different way, I maybe didn't understand it well enough to help them as best I could. And maybe I'd scratch my head and go, why are they having problems with this? I wouldn't be having problems with this. Or something similar like that about time management or whatever. So that's something that's really developed and has shown me how different being an athlete and being a coach is that empathy and critical thinking.
Yeah, and I do think that the people who are great athletes are, like you said before, genetically gifted, but also genetically able to handle more pain, like you said, genetically able to handle more training volume. And if they get successful in their own lifting endeavor through a means of pushing themselves really hard and pushing their body past what most people would consider comfortable, and then they try to coach other people the same way,
Mm.
I've seen that method fail a lot in the past. And I think like being a coach, you have to be able to look at someone's individual context. How much can they handle? What is their actual commitment? Like you said, are they a weekend warrior? Are they sort of in the middle somewhere? Are they at the elite level? And like, which bucket can I fit them in
Yeah,
to try to get them moving forward? Like, not everyone is as into it as you are,
yep,
and not everyone has the time that you have, and not everyone has the ability to do as much as you can. Like, even if they had the time.
absolutely. I would say if you took like a cross section of those examples, like we said, weekend warrior, someone who's interested, and then someone who's more serious, the most serious, and then someone who wants to take it to the world stage, you could take all those people's programs. Let's say they had a perfect program for them, and then you could exchange them all to each other and you would have a drastic drop in training performance from almost all of them, because that person who wants to take it to the world level has got these strategies in place that are kind of easier, quicker, or more manageable, and they're wondering, why am I doing this? I should be doing this thing that's the most optimal because I have the time and willingness. And then if you took that weekend warrior who's got these 3.5 hour SBD sessions and accessories, who has 3 kids, doesn't have the time for it, never completes it, is always having to throw the towel in on the session, the structure is just totally wrong for them. You have now got 4 or 5 individuals, let's say, who are really not enjoying training and who might well be on their way to exiting the sport.
Mm.
And so it really is a situation of fitting the glove correctly and giving the right things to the person based on what they want to achieve, what they claim they want to achieve, and what they claim they're able to put into the sport. I do think there's a fine line between um, that level of empathy and being able to change things for a person and fit that glove, to then just frankly like taking the piss, where it's like, okay, we have to be able to be objective and honest as coaches to be able to tell that person whether what they are claiming they want matches the stuff they're willing to do.
Yeah.
And I'm perfectly okay having that conversation with my clients. And I don't find myself having that conversation very often, but it's the best possible conversation I could have for that person because I'm aligning expectations. And that's where happiness arrives in the sport. And that's something that we haven't even touched on yet, is just kind of like happiness. And so if we can facilitate happiness rather than progress, maybe we're going to achieve progress by pursuing happiness.
Yep.
Um, and, I think that if we kind of go down the line of that idea, if we eventually arrive in a place where happiness means never really training like a powerlifter, you might be talking to someone who doesn't really love being a powerlifter. There is that too. And I do have that conversation with people who maybe really consistently complain, or really consistently don't enjoy training. I ask that question, hey, do you like lifting weights? And if the answer is like a little bit hesitant or no, it's like, well, the powerlifting's like the
Yeah.
lifting weights sport.
What are we doing here?
Like, we don't have to do that. You don't
Yeah.
have to do this.
Yep.
Sometimes people like they do a comp and they're like, I'm a powerlifter, and it's like you're okay to do a comp and then like go play like OzTag on the weekends. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then come back in like 3 or 4 years when you are genuinely a lot stronger and do another powerlifting comp. Like,
Yeah,
that
or-
is perfectly okay.
Or people might really enjoy lifting weights, and powerlifting gives them like a bit of a competitive outlet. But that doesn't mean that they want to train like that all the time, or do SBD training all the time, or
Absolutely.
compete multiple times per year, or even go to a state or national level meet. You said something in there that reminded me of the video. Did you see the video that Evie Corrigan, is it Corrigan or Carrigan?
Yes,
Did you see that video she posted about how much effort went into World Championships?
I did see that.
And like this brings up a point which I see a lot. Like you see a lot of new lifters, they got like 1 or 2 years lifting experience. They've done a few comps and they start talking like how they want to be a world champion.
Yep.
And then you see what Evie's actually doing to become a world champion. And like you said, those words don't align with those actions.
Yep.
And that's like a really important thing. People will say like, oh, I want to be a world champion, but they can't even fill in their training spreadsheet, or they can't update their coach, their videos. It's like, we need to align this person's actions with their words so that we can actually get the most out of them. Because if they say like, hey, I just want to make it to I want to make it to a state level, and then you give them an approach that's like 4 days of training, 90 minutes, they're more likely to actually achieve it. They're more likely to actually put good quality into it, and then they're more likely to actually achieve the results. Whereas if you throw 6 training days at them, they're all 3 hours long, like you're just not going to get it all done.
Totally. And there's obviously examples where even someone who doesn't want to be a world champion like has the time to do these long sessions, like that happens. But I think when you look at Evie and anyone who has achieved this high level of performance, there's so much happening behind the scenes. And I think that's where what I mentioned earlier about, hey, powerlifting is this like awesome sport where there is a relatively like low barrier for entry in regard to time given. That's true. But then if you were to look at what it takes to enter powerlifting and what someone like Evie is doing, or even if you were to look at the weeklies that I do, you might start to see the differences that are fairly significant, between the inputs that it takes to like just do the sport and then the inputs it takes to really achieve greatness in the sport. And here we have now a spectrum that exists. It's like, okay, great. Put it in front of the person and ask them to plot where they're happy, and then you've got a pretty great situation because in my mind, there is, like I've mentioned before about that inverted U concept, like there is a perfect place. However, the tough part as a coach is that it's a moving target for most people. So you have a kid, or maybe something tragic happens in your family, or you get a promotion and so your work demands go up, or you lose your job and you have financial stress and your work demands go down. There's all kinds of things that happen to humans that means as a coaches we then now need to adapt for the athlete. And that's probably a great little segue to, like, hey, let's look at these people as people first, and then consider how we can make them great athletes within that scope of saying, hey, the sphere of it being a human and their existence and their experience. We're adding athlete to that. We're not trying to take away from their life. We're trying to make it better. And there is sacrifice, but you talk to anyone who's a high performer as an athlete, sacrifice is a word that can have a negative connotation, but to most people who are really, really engaged in the sport, and I take myself as an anecdote there, the sacrifice isn't a bad thing. The sacrifice enables, and so it's a good thing. And that's probably a really great distinction to make. If you talk to someone who's like, "Oh, I've got to go to the gym tonight and like train so late. Oh, it sucks." And then another one's like, "We got a late night sesh. Let's go, all the boys or the girls, whatever, getting after it." Like that's the same thing, totally different approach to sacrificing sleep or social or whatever, and you've already got an insight into what kind of person you're working with. And both are great, both are fantastic. But like we've been saying, aligning expectations appropriately and helping that person be really happy in their experience of training, you're going to get the best outcome. You're going to get that best possible peak performance for that person. And if you've got tidy genetics too, you might see it like in national champion, world champion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think we covered empathy for 10 minutes now. What are some of the other characteristics that you think coaches must possess outside of empathy? Like, I obviously think I mentioned selfishness early for an athlete. I obviously think selflessness
Yep.
for a coach. And, this can be as much as like, spending your free time researching how you can get results for this one person who might have a tricky deadlift or a
Yep.
tricky squat or something like that, as specific as that. Or even just like, you might be competing on the same weekend as them and you have to sacrifice, some of the time throughout your own competition day towards your athletes. What are some of the others that come to mind for you?
I think the social skills element, which is a bit of an umbrella, but the social skills element to me means that you engage well with people, you engage well with a variety of different type of people, you're able to read body language and behavior well. And the first place I think about that is comp day,
Mm-hmm.
is being able to manage athletes well on comp day. I've come away from competitions as a coach disappointed in myself and how I've managed athletes, and they probably haven't felt any negative repercussions of that. But on a deeper level, I've felt that I haven't managed that individual perfectly,
Yep.
which is the standard I like to hold myself to, or at least aim for. And then I've had other competitions where I've come away and I've thought to myself, and I reflect after every comp day, is that I thought I've managed those lifters perfectly, or gotten very, very close to managing them perfectly. And that's something that I'm aspiring to. And what it comes down to is all these little moments across a competition day that accumulate to a great day, be that in their performance or just even if lifts are missed, even just in what that athlete was bringing to the platform. So, I'll give you an example. Being able to read behaviors in a lifter that are not the norm for what produces the best possible performance for them is a social skill as a coach. Picking up on that and then knowing also how to get that person back to that perfect place so they can lift well. And these are the little nuances of coaching that I think are the soft skills that are the less common soft skills. Really great comp day coaching comes down to that. And another element that I think is really important is um, being quick on your feet, quick thinking, and probably an element as well having a bit of a mathematical mind at times. I think you're a really great example of that as a comp day coach. Is it? I would uh, dread having a lifter going head to head with you at a competition, not because I doubt myself, because I know you're incredibly quick with decision making, numbers, and reading what people have left on the bar. All these different soft skills of coaching. That's getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty. But these are things that I think on comp day, you really see the difference between really well experienced coaches who've handled like crap 10 times and now they're good.
Yep.
And then other coaches who maybe are a little bit more online, which is great, and there are strengths on the online space and the programming and the feedback that we haven't gone into as much yet. But then there's that sort of brick and mortar like comp day coaching, which we see now on the world stage, and particularly over in the States, you have like comp day coaches because it's not the same thing as writing a program and eliciting progress. And so I think that's a big differentiating factor for a lot of coaches right now in probably everywhere, but I can comment on Australia, is you do see the difference in who's got 40 comps under their belt or 100 comps under their belt as a coach and who's like 6 in. You know,
Mm.
and both are great,
Yeah.
but you do see the differences, and someone might just be getting started, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and that all comes with experience as well. It's like knowing the little nuances of the rules, how to use lot numbers, how to use all kinds of things to your
Yep.
advantage to get the most out of your lifter and potentially have one of the other lifters trip up. I want to go back to the social skills thing that you mentioned. Like as a lifter, you can be a complete robot meathead and not have any issues.
Yeah.
But as a coach, like I actually think that understanding people and how to get through to different people, what language to use to different people, what body language to use to different people is the most important thing about coaching.
Totally.
Like understanding someone at a personal level means you can get them to tick when you need to. And you understand that process through the actual coaching process, through the feedback that you give them, through the notes that you write in the program, like really simple things like that.
And mistakes.
And how they talk back to you. Yeah, maybe mistakes that you've made along the way with that as well. And then you kind of add all of those little attributes and all of those little experiences that you had with that individual. You add those up and you get this kind of view of what you need to do on competition day. Whereas, like, when you're an athlete, it's literally just like go and lift the thing. Like, it's
Definitely.
very simple. And you know, being a bit of a chameleon in that regard as well, and like being able to change from coaching, handling one person who needs one thing from you to then someone who's lifting two lifts later who needs something completely opposite.
Yeah.
And I think that's really difficult too
It's
because
fun as well.
a lot of coaches like just have sort of one
Mode.
mode, one
Yep.
tempo. It's like they're really fired up or they're like really
They're
calm.
slapping backs and
Yeah.
sniffing ammonia.
And other coaches can do kind of a whole host of everything. And I think you need to be able to be a bit of a emotional chameleon.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way to frame it. Being an emotional chameleon, being able to, take on and off different skins or hats,
Chameleon.
and present in a different way, and ultimately presenting in a different way to serve that person.
Mm.
That's what it's about. It's about serving that person, and I think that would probably be one of the hardest things coming back to, flipping between this coach and athlete mode and trying to be elite in both is that hopefully, the listeners can start to understand that these are very different versions of a person. And, you'll slip up from time to time, and I don't think it's black and white. It's one of those things where it's like it's a big spectrum. But you've really got to dance that spectrum to be a good coach and good athlete. Like, and then you take that to like the same day, coaching and competing on the same day. Let's say at a championship, you know, that's a whole task in itself, because it requires you to do it in a timely manner too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
Switching back and forward is very difficult. I've only ever done that once, and I had someone who I really trusted handling
Yep.
two of the guys who were lifting at the same time as me,
Yeah.
and it worked out well. But it could have easily been a lot more difficult.
I have started doing it differently now, but if I rewind to like Melbourne Junior Nats, um, old days.
18.
Yeah, old days. Um, I remember coaching Steph, my partner, for her competition, one session before mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a nighttime session onto a late nighttime session. And thankfully, I had Tang there, Andrew Tang, who was able to read me really well, have great empathy, great social skills, and saw that I was incredibly emotionally immersed in this coaching experience. Um, and it was a great day for Steph, and that was awesome. There were elements of bumps, but it was overall a great day. And I was in this position where I was emotionally catering to my client, to my athlete on their day, and it's the most important thing to them at that time. And I'm minutes out from my day, you know. And so what Tang was able to do was he took me away from the facility for like 5 minutes, and he was able to help me transition from that coaching space to that athlete space. I had assistants doing it, and I'm so thankful for that. And I wouldn't run it that way again if I had the choice. I would probably get some assistance to make sure that everyone was taken care of, including myself. Because I think that's that funny thing. It's like when you're struck with that choice between being selfish as an athlete, when you take it as seriously as I take it, and then being selfless as a coach, and I take my coaching incredibly seriously too. It's like I hope to never have to pick between those two things. If I can put structures in place, I want to be able to take care of all those things equally because I'm doing a disservice to my clients if I do a disservice to me. Most, if not all, of my clients love to see me winning,
Hmm.
and they take a lot from that. Even my recent training momentum and recent sort of training boost, almost all of my clients are so pumped about it and are finding that been a breath of fresh air into their own training to see me doing so well. And then it's this big circle. They're doing great, I feel great, and we all kind of, you know, vibe off of each other. And that's a lovely space to be in, where they also wouldn't want me to sacrifice anything of my own athletic pursuits uh, to be selfless for them, especially when you can have other things put in place, other coaches handling and stuff like that. And I firmly believe that even though all that comp day stuff is so important, as coaches, one of our tasks is to equip our athletes to eventually get to a place where they can manage all of those things incredibly well by themselves. I've had comps where I've had to compete by myself where I wasn't ready, and that was really uncomfortable. And then I've had comps where I've kind of been mostly by myself with just someone loading plates, and that's been a really great experience. So I do think as well, yeah, as coaches, we want to get our athletes to a place where they don't need to be handheld necessarily, even though it's always fun to do it together, and where they can actually have anyone handling them and they're super equipped to get the job done.
Yeah, I don't really see it as like necessarily hand holding. I see it as like reassurance and like a face that you're comfortable with,
Of course.
and someone to just sort of be there that makes you feel comfortable. Um, I know that I've had comps where when I used to be coached by JP Kauki, him and I were actually competing in the same session
Mm.
at a nationals. He was in the group before me, and I was in the group after, and I would just like see him between attempts, and like he'd give me a little nod, and that was enough for me to feel like comfortable. He
Absolutely.
wasn't the one handling me or choosing weights or anything. I had Berkman, but just having him there, like, and me nodding back at him and him nodding back at me, that was enough for me to like be like, all right, coach is here supporting me, like, let's go.
And I mean, that's equally because he knows you.
Mm.
He knows that's enough for you.
Hmm.
So there could be another version of that where the needs are greater. And that's where I think that balance might be more interesting to strike.
Yeah.
Is like, let's say you did have a much more higher needs client at the same comp or same session as you, and it would legitimately take a lot away from your athlete side to be able to give them that. So then it would be your job to facilitate that another way. That's kind of where I was going with
Yeah,
that. Is
yeah,
like you
for
might have
sure.
those situations.
How do you think
Um,
you would handle that now if you had an athlete who you felt actually needed you there in order for them to get the most out of the day, and you actually felt that they probably do need me there to get the most out of their day, and you happen to also be competing, or maybe you have to weigh in halfway through their
mm,
session, or like, how would you navigate that?
I think that it just can't be a surprise. I think that it's okay if you're in a situation where you might recognize that they're going to do their absolute best, most likely, if I'm there. But here's the thing, too, that our judgment in advance isn't always correct. So I am very rarely thinking or saying that. I really think that most, if not all, of my athletes who are, say, at a national level or more, which is the only time that would ever really be a problem, are definitely well equipped enough to do their best without me there. I
Yep.
say that hand on heart.
Yep.
And if they aren't there, that's kind of my personal standard for my lifters going to nationals a lot of the time. Because we have these, at the moment, fairly low qualifying standards for nationals in terms of totals. Um, some of my lifters will do their first comp. Oh, I'm going to Nats. No, you're not. Because you have some developing to do, and that's fine. And then where to from there? If you're not really going to be competitive to go to that next level, you can begin to question that as a coach. And the only reason you're questioning it is further development. And so if I have different standards on my lifters to go to nationals, which might be personal lifting standards and goals we set, but it might also be the way they carry themselves. How good at competing is this person? Um, there isn't this rush in my eyes as a coach to send someone to nationals. So how would I handle it? What would I do? I don't think I'll put myself in that position to begin with.
Okay.
And if that person, naturally, everyone prefers to have their coach there with them, like you said, familiar face, gives you that confidence. But if it is going to be that sort of situation, time, make sure it's just known well enough in advance that the preparations can be made. The worst thing you can do is arrive like 3 weeks and go, oh, wait a second, we're in the same session. This is going to be a disaster,
Mhm.
you know? So even if
Well, oftentimes the schedules are released so late that we don't even know.
even if you feel like it might be a disservice to the lifter and that your athlete pursuits are in conflict, um, you can kind of absolve a lot of that by not even letting on that it might be a problem. So I
Mhm.
think that the narrative that you sell to the lifter can really do a lot of damage control on that, anyways. Especially if it is just a situation that is completely, truly out of your control, and that we've all recognized that I'm an athlete, you're an athlete. Yes, I coach you too. The 99% of the job is done by the time we get to competition day. The plan is set. And if someone's loading your plates and you have the support of your whole network, which is a coach and a lot of other people, you're going to do great, you know? Um, so yeah, I have full confidence that anyone that I've prepared to go to nationals will just handle that without a hitch.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the preparation for that comes from you in the first place. It's like teaching them along the way how to select the right weights. Also communicating with the person that you're going to get them handled by, so they understand some of those softer skills that we spoke about before with regards to what do they need from you, as from cueing perspective, from a body language, from a hype perspective, all of those kind of things. That can all be prepared for.
Yes.
But I also do think that no one will ever do a better job than the coach.
Totally.
So it's like, maybe you can get someone to be 80% as good as you to stand in, but they'll never quite get to that 100.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it's one of those things where if you're going to have to get other things in place, that you do your due diligence and you have those conversations with whoever's going to handle the person and give them really good insights into what this person really needs. Because I I I agree with what you said there about no one will do as good of a job as a coach, or as the coach, but I think you can get really close.
Yeah.
I think you can get really close because I take a lot of pride in saying that my lifters at competition, unless it's their first comp, incredibly autonomous. And that comes from a place of the coaching style that I adopt in the week to week, where I'm there for my lifters, I'm communicative to a point that I believe is going to be the most helpful. Again, that inverted U idea of trying to strike that balance for that individual where they're allowed to have space to have the experience. And I'm not like there, like, how is that? It's like, okay, have that experience, and then we're going to reflect and build on that. So what happens, and what I've just noticed is, we get to comp days. My lifters generally are very confident, quite relaxed, ready to go. They know what the plan is. They've been involved in the process of developing the plan, and I'm there to assist them be their best. And so that's where I would go and say, because I've created that environment, that if I wasn't there, actually, on the day, I don't think it would be a massive hole. And I take a lot of pride in saying that. Doesn't mean that I'm not valuable on the day. It just means like my lifters are awesome.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, 100%.
credit to them. You know,
I
like
I definitely agree that you can prepare someone as well as you possibly can, but I also do think that, like, unpredictable shit happens.
totally.
And when you're familiar with what someone needs from a psychological standpoint, if something goes wrong at the start of a meet, and you can see in their face that they are like frightened,
Great point.
you know how to react. Whereas if you get someone standing in, they
Yeah.
might have just met them for the first time, or maybe they've trained with them once or twice.
Yep.
They might go, oh shit, like I don't quite know what to do here.
That's where the holes
And
are.
and I
Yep.
think, like, particularly at high level competitions where like each attempt matters so much towards placings, I think that's really, really important.
Yep.
But again, like, I'm at the point now where, like, coaching for me is clearly a priority over my own athletic endeavors. And if I was competing in the same session as someone, I would still be there, like, on the platform with my lifter while I'm competing. Um, that may change at some point, but for now, like, that's kind of where I am. And I totally understand if you, not just you, but like the collective you, wouldn't be willing to do that. But yeah,
Yeah, I think
that's
as
kind of where
well.
I stand now.
I completely agree with that, and I think that you made a really good point there about. Well, are we talking about a smooth day or a tumultuous day? Because that's where you're really going to expose the cracks in anything is when you have actually some adversity. Um, and again, I would come back and challenge that even so, where hopefully you're able to either take value away from that, build robustness of character in an athlete, even if there is a negative element. But that I would agree that that's where the hole is. If something bad does happen, if something negative does happen, knowing that lifter deeply is probably going to be the most advantageous thing versus someone who's a fill in.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other characteristics you can consider that are a little bit unique to coaching that athletes don't need to possess?
Um, I think it depends on your coaching style, but being a little bit, I guess, neurotic about detail is important. And I think that comes down to the attention to detail from a programming perspective, is being able to observe things, learn, and then implement change in a detailed manner rather than guessing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I would say is that attention to detail element for sure.
Okay, so what about how the sort of intersection of athlete and coach skill sets sort of intersect? What are some skills that you think do overlap between athlete and coach? Like, I think the first one that you mentioned, zooming in, zooming out, I think that's really important.
Yep.
The athlete has to be able to contextualize their own training at a very short term period, like a session to session basis, but also a very long term
Yep.
period, like a month, year type deal. Is there anything else that strikes you as necessary for both parties?
I think most of the attributes that are going to be necessary for both parties are going to be a bit more vague, so like the general things like dedication, persistence, like
Hard
we said,
work, consistency, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. Yep.
There's those things that I think still apply to both. However, I think when you really get inside of the qualities that really, really matter for both, they really start to drift away from each other. I really do think that. So the crossover does exist, but like I said, I do think that they are a lot more vague. So maybe not as worth, I guess, our time to talk on in the sense that it's just a bit more flimsy.
Yep. I
Yeah.
think the big one is actually time. You alluded to this earlier with regards to like athletic peak. Um, you know, 20 years in the game to really reach your peak. And I think the same is true for coaching because the more people you coach, the more situations you experience,
Mm.
the more situations you then problem solve, the more problem solving you then have in your like toolkit, the more scenarios you've seen on competition day, the more programming styles you've used, the more things that you've seen come into trend and then leave and then come back into trend and then leave. I think that's really important. And then obviously from an athletic standpoint, just doing it long enough to actually get big and strong enough.
Totally. Yeah. I'd 100% agree with that, that the time element is almost always an advantage as a coach and as an athlete. But that time is only an advantage if you have a lot of those other skills to help you along the way, because something done poorly for a long time is just something done poorly.
Yes.
So there are, I would look at my time coaching as levels or phases that have built upon one another.
Hmm.
And if you're able to say that, then time has helped you. But in a lot of other cases, you're just like, on
Recycling the same
hamster on
thing.
the wheel
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
situation, and it's just time isn't an assistance.
yeah.
So I think that's an important note to make, is like, oh, time, like don't be complacent because of time. It's like, oh, it's time, just more time. It's like, yeah, more time of doing like the shit right.
Yeah, you got to
So
actually use that time
yeah,
effectively.
like you gave the Evie example. It's like, well, she wouldn't have achieved the greatness she's achieved if she just trucked along doing the middle stuff. She's really got a lot of attention to detail every day,
Mhm.
and then she's stacked that and stacked that and stacked that for a long time, and
Yeah,
she's kind of getting going at the
yeah,
moment.
absolutely.
You know,
And
I
I
think
think
that, yeah, go on.
on the other side of the coin is like you can't just expect to do everything right for a year or 2 years in either coaching or athletic realm and expect to be at the top.
Oh
It
yeah,
has to be like a long time of using that time effectively
oh
for a long time. Yeah.
we see it a lot, and I mean, I've been there. You achieve a really good, like total or progress from some training cycles, and you start to extrapolate and you start to think about, oh, where am I going to be in 6 months, in a year? I put 50 on my total, I'll do another 50, and this assumption that it just kind of keeps working that way. And I think that that's something that does lead a lot of people to disappointment is this idea that, yeah, this 1 year, this 2 year focus, that's great. But really, if we really, really look at the high achievers, it is that long term duration of really high application. And that's cool. I mean, like I said, I always come back to I really don't like it when people say, oh, powerlifting's such an easy sport. It's never what I'm saying when I say that low barrier for entry. It's just like it is attainable for you to do these things. You make the right choices, and if you put the right structures in place, and I mean, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, because the more I think about it, even though I just said, oh, it's attainable, it's like also there's money element. Like let's say you're going to take care of your training, your nutrition, and maybe like even your psychology, and you have a coach for each of those things.
Physio,
Right.
nutrition.
So, like, it is and it isn't. So, it all comes back to that idea of time, of being able to, strike a balance. And again, people say, oh, balance, and sometimes have this, again, negative connotation of being balanced as if like you're taking the easy road. But balance truly is optimal, because if you're overdoing something, doing way more than you can sustain, you crash and burn.
Yeah.
If you're doing way less than what you can sustain, you're doing yourself a disservice. So balance really is exactly what it sounds like, is doing the exact amount that you can all of the time. That's the tricky part.
And you mentioned earlier the word happiness, which I think comes back to balance. If you are balanced in terms of how much you're doing, how much you're giving to the sport, that's going to be rewarding for you internally, but it's also probably going to be enjoyable for you. And therefore, you're going to be able to do it for longer. So it's all about kind of finding like where you sit on the how much am I willing to give to this, and can I actually give this consistently?
Totally.
And if you can find that sort of limit to where like, hey, this is the most I can give, I'm willing to give that much for 10 years, then that's the goods.
Yeah, at 100%. I think that all the little things that we've addressed all tie back to a couple of key major points. And hopefully, those who are listening can start to kind of visualize what it looks like for someone to find their peak. And then, like I said, the rest of it in regard to how you go compared to everybody else is like somewhat out of your hands. So
Yeah.
just enjoy yourself.
Hmm.
Be happy. If you enjoy training like this and being a power lifter, do it the way that you enjoy it for a long period of time and see what you can do.
Yep. Yeah. So the reason that this topic came to mind with you, Maddie, is because you recently had a stint of coaching yourself. So I'd be interested to hear sort of why you went down that route, how long it lasted, how'd you go, and now what you're doing.
Totally. So I sort of fell into self coaching after Nats, the most recent nationals, and the reason that I moved to self coaching was that I went through this injury phase that was really challenging. I felt very burnt out during that process, and I persisted. I stuck to it. I tried to take all the advice I'm giving now, but even so, it was a very long period of time of adversity, and I think considering the nature of the injury and considering the length of the injury, it made me question a lot of things about how I was approaching my lifting, how I was approaching the sport, staying healthy, staying happy. And I knew that if I was going to achieve what I want to achieve, which is to go to Worlds, represent the country, and do well at Worlds, that I would need to find a way to improve my processes to make sure I made it, like exactly the things we're saying. That if I wound up with the injury that I had, which was a spinal fracture, again,
A broken back.
spinal.
Final.
If I wound up with an injury like that again and again and again, I simply wouldn't achieve that. So I needed to rethink it. And my coach at the time, Tang, was in the same boat on rethinking our strategies and whatnot. And the way we approached it was just simply a shift of the balance of power in our coaching relationship. So Tang was still involved during that self-coaching time. However, as a coach, I was interested, and it made me the most happy to try things that I was thinking about.
Yep.
And it wasn't really worth the extra step of explaining that to him and then him writing it down. I might as well just write it down myself.
Uh-huh.
So he supported that. We gave it a whirl, did a prep on that. Can't complain. It was pretty good. There was that novelty, which made me enjoy it a lot. But very quickly after that, and I'm really happy that I was paying close attention, uh, there started to be some cross wires between the athlete side and the coaching side, and being like, hey, we just talked about how different this stuff is. And inside of my brain, I'm trying to manage both those elements at the same time.
Yep. Because I'm
And
sure your athlete brain was thinking like, fuck, I want to do more. I want to do more. I want to push harder. I want to push harder.
It was just constant questions that weren't needing to be answered. And I kept getting really confused about what I thought was best for me. Whereas when I write a program for a client, I have absolute clarity because it reflects my experience and I'm able to look at that person really objectively. And a lot of the strategies I first implemented were to continue to move away from this injury, and that naturally optimized performance relatively. So I think self coaching was the perfect thing to do for the period that I did it. It was agile. It allowed me to train in a way that was a little bit different from traditional, which was the previous style. And I was very happy with what I achieved in that period. However, more recently, I've started with a new coach.
Before you go into that, what did you learn from that period of time of self coaching?
What I learned during the self coaching period of time is that for me at least, I believe it's important for everyone to have a coach.
Yep.
And I'm glad that I had that experience because I was trying to understand how people did the self coaching thing because I know a few lifters who do self coach with success. And I was interested to find out for myself. So what I learned was that for me, um, is that if I want to achieve what I'm trying to achieve, that it's not the right path for me. I learned that there's too many cross wires, there are too many unnecessary questions being asked, and that to be an athlete and to express as an athlete for myself, I'm better off being told this is the plan. That's probably the biggest things that I learned on a personal level. Um, from a programming side of things, it was liberating in the sense that I was able to try some stuff and with a lot of success. So I love playing with the boundary between the specificity side of things and that lower specificity side of the lens and combining those factors between different lifters and seeing what that lowest possible dose is to achieve.
By lowest specificity stuff, you mean like bodybuilding stuff?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe like if we had an example, it might be a low bar squat versus say like implementing things like hack squats, belt squats, and
Uh huh.
whatnot,
Yep.
and being able to deliver more training volume through not through the comp lift. And I went like as low as you can go, and I talked about that regarding nationals. But even post nationals, I was still in this space where I had learned so much about how low I can go from a skill perspective on a low bar squat and sort of fill in volume through other means. So that was probably the most valuable experience. And now I'm able to express that through the clients, through the programs I write for my own clients. So the self coaching benefited me more as a coach than as an athlete.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've kind of concluded that you need someone to do the thinking for you for athlete Matt,
Yep.
and athlete Matt needs to be allowed to just be a robot and work hard.
Absolutely.
Whereas coach Matt needs to be critical and thinking about other people's situations without having your emotions tied to it.
100%.
Yeah, cool.
And I think that it's one of those things where when I was self coaching, even though relative to coming out of an injury, things were good on the surface and I was, having good training experiences, it was like the athlete side was being limited or
Mhm.
being capped because there always had to exist this coach in the brain too. So there wasn't space to kind of fill it up with athlete. There was always that voice there, even in the middle of training sessions, which was an assessment as a coach, which is completely unnecessary as an athlete for me.
Yeah.
Like you said, being able to be a robot and make athlete training decisions reflective of coach wants
Uh-huh.
is where it's at for me.
Yeah.
That would be the biggest thing.
And I've certainly found that with my own training when I've had too much control over the program and the nuts and bolts of things. That's when my training doesn't actually go very well because I'm always thinking about how can I make this slightly better?
Yep.
How can I improve upon XYZ rather than just doing what's in front of me and just being a robot and trying hard. And I think that is something that a lot of coaches struggle with in their own training too. So if you are a coach out there,
Yeah.
I think it's a really good idea for you to have a coach so that you can switch off coach mode, go into athlete mode, and simplify the decision making and bias things towards effort.
Absolutely. But it's also where that zoom out, zoom in thing comes in.
Mm.
Because if you're, what you just said is like, okay, if I'm sort of too hands on, that's where some of my worst training occurs. Well, a lot of the time that might mean changes are being made frequently, fairly knee jerk. Whereas being able to zoom out, it's even as simple as this training week was mediocre. Okay, write out the next one. And then you might see an improvement. Like it can be as simple as that. And that's zooming out.
Yep.
Whereas zooming in too much as a coach athlete is like you're looking at every little tiny thing that happens, being like, well, is that the perfect choice? It doesn't actually matter if that is a perfect choice because you actually never know. You make your best educated guess on things. And most of the time, the application to the program that's being written is infinitely more important than exactly what is being written at that detail.
Yeah.
And so looking at it so closely is actually useless most of the time if the person who's written the program has experience, has history of success, and knows you somewhat well. Just actually the application to that is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think the best example of that is look at high achievers in powerlifting, and you can see this vast difference between how people train.
yeah,
Um, like conjugate west side, where there's very little specificity, really high load on some days, really low load on other days, very inconsistent exercise selection, like not overloading the same exercise, changing stuff all the time, mad results. And why is that? Effort. Like it all comes back to that. And then you see the other side of the coin, really high specificity SPD multiple times per week. What do they get? Really great results as well. So like I guess the idea of sort of racking your brain around every single decision that you make is probably misguided and probably a waste of your energy.
couldn't agree more. And you know, it's a little bit of off the cuff kind of comment to say like, oh, everything works, but truthfully, in the world that we're existing in now in powerlifting, where there are particular systems and styles of thinking, everything works, and like you said, the defining factor is time and effort, and we come back to that idea, and we kind of harp and harp on about it, but really it's about not getting lost in the minutia. It's about being able to zoom out adequately enough, apply yourself to a process, assess, replan, go again. Enjoy it. Have fun.
Yep.
That's like, if you really summarize what we're saying, like that is it. And it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. People love complicated shit,
Yep.
but we just need to keep it really simple and come back to these key factors and understand that when you look at the best of the best, that is actually what they're doing. It might be dressed up in a certain way, but that is what is occurring.
Yeah. And I was listening to a podcast with Bryce Krawcheck and Bryce Lewis, and they were both discussing the idea of like, what are the things that they do really well that has helped them become elite?
Yep.
And it just comes back to like effort and consistency. And that's such a boring answer, but like really, that's the crux of it.
Yeah, and I
Just
guess
try really hard for a really long time.
yeah, and I guess that as coaches, it's our job to dress it up so it's attractive, But at the end of the day, coming back to it, like, hey, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm going to dress it up for this person so that to them it looks cool.
Yeah, but like giving effort over a long period of time doesn't just mean doing the same things that you find
No,
monotonous over time.
no,
It's the coach's job is to find the things that enable that person to work hard. And
totally.
that might look different on a block to block basis.
Oh
It
man,
might mean setting, block goals. It might mean switching up exercises. It might mean a
hundred
whole
percent.
host of things. But if you can get someone to zoom in on a block or a week and give good effort, and then zoom out and you've got 52 weeks of good effort, like what do you expect is going to happen?
That's a winner.
Yeah.
100%. And the bandwidth of differences in um, the kinds of clients that I work with coming out of a competition and the kind of training we do and or even extrapolate 52 weeks, so different.
Mm.
And that's kind of the essence of coaching and individualization, is being able to come back again, like I said earlier in the pod, who am I talking to? Listening to that person, having empathy and going, here's your plan.
Yeah. Yep. So you've just started with Marcellus from Craftsmanship,
Big dog.
coach over in the US. Where is he in the US?
That's a great question, actually.
Don't know.
I should know.
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm sure he doesn't know what New South Wales is either.
Yeah. So, what are you in halfway through second block with him?
Yeah, third week starting on the weekend. We start on the weekends for our
So,
weeks.
what were the characters? This is going to go back to the characteristics of coaches chat. What were the characteristics of Marcellus that had you select him?
I first started looking more closely at Marcellus when he actually hugely called out the flex guys. And
Go make us viral, Maddie. Go.
let's go. And honestly, I listened into that, observed, and watched some of his comments on that, and that was the first moment where I thought, all right, I can really get around some of the things this guy is saying, because he was calling out coach malpractice, and I think that someone who's going to do that in such a way is someone who really cares about their coaching and cares about their individual clients. And so, look, that was when he first sort of perked my interest. And I watched him a little bit. He's got a lot of content out there. So again, someone who's spending a lot of time immersing themselves in the sport as a coach. Something else I admire about Marcellus is that he is a great lifter. I think he's achieved a 500 dots, which, whilst in America that mightn't be particularly high standard, podium or something like that. In Australia, that would be an extremely good total. And so, for my personal view on strength standards, I think he's a fantastic lifter. The other thing that I really like about Marcellus is that if you look at his leverages, he has clearly had to think very critically about his approach to both training and technique because of his, you know, relatively long arms, long legs. You look at him squat, he's got to figure things out and move in a way that's not maybe center of the bell curve. And so all these things just kind of accumulated to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm at least going to have a conversation with this person. And the consultation, we really hit it off in that chat and we really agreed on a lot of things when it comes to application of powerlifting, less so like the nitty gritty systems. I didn't really care to talk about how do you program or anything like that. It was more so understanding what he looks for in lifters that he works with and to see if that matched with what I look for in a coach. So some of those conversations, and we really aligned in the sense that we wanted a coach or an athlete when we're talking to each other who were high application, who were ready to do the work, ready to, like we said, fill in their sheet, do the training, and adhere to a process. And the same from the coaching side of things was, I think that my needs at the time when I signed up, which was not long ago, are really different to the needs that I had when I started the sport. And a lot of that came down to having been through this really prolonged injury. I needed someone, and what I'm really getting from Marcellus at the moment is like a bit of a bro, like a bit of a mate, to really, support me and get excited for me and for us to like get on the phone and just get G'd up for the week.
Really wish I got that from my coach.
Oh, bro, you should sack him. And it's something that it's again that's a real deep nuance of coaching. I wasn't able to really say that to him to start with, but that's the biggest thing that I have gotten from him and that I'm trying to get from him because I've been doing this quite a while as a lifter, competitively and like social lifting, if you will, prior to that. So those elements of like technique and assessment, that is far less
Yeah.
what I need from a coach right now. And even the first week we started, he looked at all my tech and he's like, "Man, you move great," and that's wonderful to hear. And that's like, okay, so what stuff are we paying attention to? And so how the program's laid out, obviously that's one. Long term planning, that's two. Um, Setting realistic goals, accountability to the little things, and that's something that I've talked about a lot in the past. And frankly, I lost my intensity gradually throughout that sort of 2-year period where I was injured because it was just really tiring.
Yeah.
I have to be honest.
Yep.
It just got really tiring. I got really sick of the situation that I was in. I kept showing up. I didn't miss a single session, but I just was really exhausted by the end of it.
Yep.
And so there were little things that, would kind of fall, be that, the closeness of tracking nutrition, the recovery and whatnot. And so that's also been a massive benefit of starting with Marcellus is he's got a really systemized approach. So things like taking measurements weekly, tracking my food, my sleep, my stress. He is happy to have conversations with like Amelia, who's my psychology coach. And he's just really involved in those little parts of the process. And yeah, it's just one of those things that we really hit off naturally, and we have so far been a fantastic fit.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm really happy.
Yep.
So it comes back to it where my training is going really well because I'm getting in there, I'm engaged. Not hard to engage me in training because I just love training. And I've got someone who I respect, who I admire, who sees my goals, understands what I want to achieve, has written them down, and has said we're working towards that. And
Yeah.
that's it.
And I think just being excited to check in with your coach
Yeah.
is like a really nice feeling to like do a whole week of training where you feel like you actually are really proud of yourself and then you tell someone, "Hey, I'm really proud of myself."
Yeah.
It's a really nice feeling.
Absolutely.
I remember like my first ever coach, Hanny from TSA, over in the States. I had a good meet performance and he sent me an audio message. This is the first time he ever sent me an audio message. This is like 2015. And he was like, at the start of it, he goes, "Alex, you sick cunt." And I still to this day remember it because like I felt so good about receiving like that
That
feedback.
praise, yeah.
And he was also just excited to say the C bomb because no one says it in
Yeah, yeah,
America.
yeah, yeah.
But like I totally like vibe with the idea that you need to get along with your coach. You need to enjoy talking with them. You need to have a good back and forth, have a good rapport. That's like seriously for me number one because like we just said, nuts and bolts are less important. It's about how you can make someone work hard, make someone enjoy training, make someone looking forward to tell you how they did.
Absolutely. And, to kind of backtrack slightly, I have and had all of those things with my previous coach. I think that there was definitely an element of novelty as well that, like, respectfully, like I'll say, that excitement level, once you've been working with a coach for a real long period of time, become really good friends, because of that closeness that Tang and I developed, at times there was a more casual sort of approach to the check-in and, and,
Hmm.
and, and that level of excitement might not quite have been there, and we just respected that and appreciated that that was occurring. And we're great friends. And he was able to say, hey, what's best for you, I do think, is that, especially considering all the stuff you've been through, is we want that novelty of excitement of
Yeah.
new, the things I just described about Marcellus and why I picked him, to be able to engage, really fully engage in that process. So, yeah, look, I have a lot of admiration for Tang, and also the way he approached that conversation with me. It was semi led by him, and he always said that to me, when he started getting more into physio and stuff like that. He's like, Matty, if I ever get to a point where I don't feel like I can fully service your wants and your aspirations, because he knows how big those aspirations are, he's like, I'll tell you. And we
Yeah.
kind of got to that point where we both just had that conversation very, very organically. Um,
T-
but
t-
yeah, to your point, I think that level of excitement to check in has been a huge part of the fun.
yeah. Two things you said sparked some conversation for me. First one was you actually mentioned to me that you didn't want to work with someone who you personally knew. Um, is Can you explain the reasoning for that? Well, actually, yeah, could do that first.
Yeah, so at least at the time, and I stand by it, that I didn't want to start working with someone who had like a preconceived idea of me or notion of me and how I function, um, and maybe certain level of bias or expectation around how they should coach me. I actually wanted to start with someone who I believed is skilled and who's worked with a wide array of lifters with success. And I wanted to start that process with them. Because I know I'm in a good position physically to work with, I wanted to also have that level of accountability from me to do the job. And I know that's going to be best for me because, again, I'm not like buddy buddy with this person from the start. It's like we're coming in, it's a business transaction that becomes a social one and a friends thing. But really, it's, hey, I'm here to coach you. I'm going to tell you what you need to do to be your best, and you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted. And not that I couldn't achieve that with someone I know, but just it felt good to me to think, "Oh, I'm just going to actually start fresh with someone."
I also think there's a part of it, like particularly when you first start with someone, and this was going to be my other point, is like there's that excitement and that buy-in, and like the reason that you've picked this person is at the forefront of your mind, and it's almost like I need to prove to myself that this was the right decision.
Yes. And that's a valid point when it comes to like eliciting progress is like the mental game and the buy-in game.
Uh-huh.
We talk about like placebo and actually having that element of that mental edge, just something as novel as that. Like, I've picked this person. Everyone knows I've picked this person. I'm going to crush it,
Yeah, and you
like,
also, if you pick someone who's well known as a good coach, you don't want to let them down either.
yeah, a small element, probably the smallest element was some of the lifters Marcellus works with, some of the strongest going around in the USAPL in the world. And that's cool because, I'm looking at Bob Matthews and I'm like, he's a teammate, I'm like, that's cool.
Big Bob.
And for me to try to, I think the other element of removing myself from it, the Australian scene is also, I think that, frankly, a lot of Australian lifters have a lot of limiting beliefs around what they can achieve. And I think that zooming out and looking over at the States where we're seeing some of the strongest lifters in the world and going, hey, I'm a human too, let's achieve something awesome, that really appeals to me because I see a lot of negative chat, a lot of limiting belief chat around, oh, but these other countries are way ahead of us. Yeah, all good and well. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, of course. I, I I back that for sure. Um, I don't want to get into a discussion of what Australia needs to do to get back on the map because we'll probably be here
We'll get out the
forever.
files.
But let's actually take a quick break and we'll come back in a sec.
So,
Matt, if you could eliminate one thing from the powerlifting space, what would you pick?
if I could eliminate one thing from the powerlifting space, I think it's a good question, especially in the Australian scene. We've had a lot of change in the culture and the landscape of powerlifting in Australia over the years. So many things. Oh my goodness. I think the thing I would eliminate on a community level is what I'd call like the friendly fire between lifters. At the end of the day, we're all friends, we're all teammates. Ideally, we're all just lifters trying to achieve what we can. And I think that sometimes this invisible barrier of being in a different federation or something like that makes us feel like we're pitched against each other. And I think that having different federations is a very healthy thing because it helps the standard to keep on rising. And it means that if one federation is putting a lot of resources towards improving X, Y, or Z, it highlights that another federation isn't. And I think that the lifters should be at the forefront of that. Lifters should be the ones who benefit from that. And sometimes I think socially it just becomes this sort of thing where it's this little mini war that's occurring, which I find quite unpleasant and unsavory. And I think that it's kind of missing the point that actually we're all teammates, we're all friends trying to benefit from this cool sport.
What are some specifics? Because I don't know if I actually see a lot of this.
Like it's just like the sort of social media slander that occurs, and I think that it's something that there's no specific thing that I'll bring up because then I have to drop some names.
Yeah, dude, call,
Um,
call some people out, bro. Come on.
but I think that you definitely see just like subtle things being called out between federations to just hate on it and make it seem worse, to prop up the federation that that person is in. And I think it occurs always. Like I would say that every single federation that exists in Australia has had something nasty to say, or the people within it have had something nasty to say or negative to say about another federation, and like to what effect, to try and help their own cause. So whenever I see that, whether it's frequent or infrequent, I just look at it and I'm like, we could do without that.
To be fair to those people, there are a lot of things to criticize.
I think that there's always going to be something to work on, and there's always things to criticize. But I think the way in which that happens can either be, helpful or harmful or nothing. And I think a lot of the time it's the platform that it occurs on. So, like, we live in a social media warrior era, in my opinion, where people think that their opinion's super valid, and they'll go on, they'll just like post something, and hey, like I post on social media, so I must think my opinion's somewhat valid too, and that's fine. But the effect is the question. So if someone posts something somewhat negative or hateful about a federation that something needs work, and nothing happens, that has zero effect. So I just think there are better channels. There's more like active pathways to actually elicit positive change versus just being like, you guys suck and this is bad about your thing,
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's just a little bit
At,
like, oh, okay, great. Like have a great day
at
kind of
the
thing.
end of the day, we are lifting heavy circles. And whether you decide to lift heavy circles with knee wraps on and knee sleeves on, probably shouldn't really play too much into it.
Yeah, exactly. I think what I'm referring to is mostly like chat that is not intended to be helpful. It's purely criticism for criticism's sake. And that's where it's like, okay, that did nothing great, like good for us.
Yep.
Felt like a waste of time.
Yeah. I guess my answer to this question would be social media related also, would be too much of an emphasis on social media, being a social media powerlifter, like spending all this time editing your training videos when, you've been lifting for 3 months, as opposed to actually like just getting in and doing some dirty work, getting your hands dirty, and maybe finding out if you actually like powerlifting first before you make it your whole identity on the internet.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that comes back to some of the stuff we've spoken about, where if you're throwing like all these resources at creating this like social media identity for powerlifting, and you actually don't really like it, you almost lock yourself in a little bit because socially you've locked yourself in a little bit. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I'm the first person who like posts their stuff and like creates that narrative around it. But also like it's authentically me.
Hmm.
I'm not on there kind of like trying to create something that doesn't exist. It's just a pure representation of like my day to day. Um, but yeah, I think that um, like do things on social media however you will, but then like it's just more so considerate of those after effects. Like just take care of yourself. You don't have to prove anything on social media, it's one of those things that exists to represent yourself and to kind of like put stuff out there that is meaningful to you. But yeah, I think that you don't even if you don't even know that you really love this thing, and then you're trying to like throw these resources at it, maybe they're just resources that you could be putting elsewhere into better use.
Yeah, I think I'm just salty because I'm old. And when I did my first comp, I think I had one Instagram post and it wasn't about powerlifting.
Yeah, I
So,
was really surprised how many pixels that photo of you had that throwback.
bro, that was actually a good photo, right?
I was just really surprised at the clarity it had. 'Cause
I'm
I was like, how long ago was that?
pretty old. That was in 2015, actually, that one.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so we're going to get to a little segment called Instagram Question of the Week.
Oh yeah.
So I put up a little poll, not a poll, I put up a little question box on my Instagram story yesterday asking for questions. I said I would answer one, or we would answer one, but I've actually got two that are quite similar. So I'll shout out both these people. Claudio Shea at My Coach Claude's. Why do you still powerlift and what has attributed to your longevity? And Eldwan at Eldwan, what are your keys to longevity? So very similar questions.
Cool.
Do you want to take it away, Matty?
Yeah. So the first question was, would you repeat the first one for me?
Why do you still powerlift?
Let's start with that. Why do I still powerlift? I still powerlift because I really want to see what I can achieve. You know, what is the highest level of strength that I can achieve natural in my lifetime? That's something that really appeals to me. It always has, no matter what sport I've been in, if it's been rugby, football, all these different sports. I've always trained, I've always loved the pursuit of strength. And I see myself doing this for as long as I can and seeing how good can it get? How strong can I get? That's something that keeps me in the sport. What's the second part of that question?
What has attributed to your longevity?
Cool. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of that. What is attributed to my longevity, first and foremost, is that I am in a sport that I really enjoy. The second thing that has attributed to my longevity is that I started the sport at a pretty high strength standard, relatively speaking, and I probably have relatively good genetics for this sport. I wouldn't say I've got perfect genetics, say in the form of leverages, but in regard to like my response to training, generally speaking, developing strength and muscle, I've not been too unlucky. So I think that also you have to sort of flag that as like, if you were to put in all the things that I've put in and achieve half of the outcome, that wouldn't be as fun.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an element too.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a fact as well. Like we're all somewhere on that bell curve, and so it's easier for someone to say, "Oh, powerlifting is so fun. Look how great this sport is." When they do all the same things someone else does and put double the kilos on their total, it's like, well, of course you're having a lot more fun.
Yeah, well, I
You
actually
know?
had a conversation with a new client recently who asked me that. He said to me something along the lines of, if I give all of this effort, I want to know that it's going to be worth it. Like, am I going to get strong enough to where a
Yeah.
point where I'm actually going to feel like all of that effort and that time was worth it? And I said to him, like, I can't really tell you where the ceiling is.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with what the result is, and you have to be okay that that result is a representation of your best effort over that time period.
Exactly.
Because you might live for 10 years and only achieve like a 400 dots, whereas there's a lot of people out there who do 400 in their first competition.
Yeah.
And you can't really compare yourself to those people.
Yeah. There's this thing called outcome praise versus effort praise. And it's like a parenting thing. But it also comes over to coaching and even self talk.
Might have to take some notes.
Is that I was listening to this podcast that pretty much spoke about outcomes and also like intention to seek out harder tasks in the future based on whether a person is praised on their effort or praised on like how talented they are. Essentially, the summary is that when people, particularly children, but also carries over to adults, are praised for how talented they are, their outcomes diminish. Whereas if someone is praised for their effort and how well they apply to something, generally they seek out harder tasks in the future and their outcomes improve. So I think that focusing on effort and focusing on applying yourself to the process would be one of the biggest takeaways there and is going to help your longevity and it's going to give you the best possible outcomes too.
Yep. So I guess I'll answer that question now. Why do I still powerlift? Different to you, because at the point of my life now, I'm not really geared towards becoming the strongest I can be. It's more about becoming the strongest I can be with the time allocation that I have and the amount of effort that I'm willing to give. And that's certainly changed over my time. But I think I'm at a good place now, which has definitely contributed to my longevity, where I can actually like put that into perspective and be okay with the fact that I'll probably never get to a point where I'm actually at my limit potential.
Understood. Yeah. So it's almost like that level of acceptance of circumstances and choices that, because, like you might have another individual who's in the same set of circumstances as you. I mean, even give Marcellus as an example. He's a
Yeah,
dad.
Adam Jones is a good example
Yeah,
as
and,
well.
and and individuals who make different choices because it goes beyond like, oh, I'm a dad.
Mm.
There are other like social elements, there are other like time management elements and whatnot that make up our life. And so I think it's really quite cool to be able to say, I'm in a place where I accept all of these things and my choices, and then what the outcome will be reflecting that, and saying like I may never like reach my like optimal. Like I don't know if anyone can say that unless they like a full time athlete
Mhm.
going to like the Olympics, something like that, where you're literally doing nothing else outside of the optimization of that outcome.
Yeah,
So I think we
that's
all,
literally like Kobe level stuff where
yeah. So I
like,
think we all accept that. Like I said, is the space that exists in powerlifting like maybe a little lower in terms of inputs and so therefore more accessible to optimize?
mhm.
Yes. But I think most people would have a hard time saying that they are going to reach their like absolute optimal no matter what anyone says. Like there's going to be slip ups, there's going to be moments where you don't have all the boxes ticked, but being able to accept that and go, but I'm still going to apply relative to my lifestyle at that time is perfect. That's
Yeah.
pretty much everything we've been saying.
Yeah.
So but that for you is what creates longevity. Because if you were to try and apply differently, you would probably find yourself at least battling with the thought of falling out of the sport.
Yeah,
Like potentially.
I think like what has attributed to my longevity the most is that I've never actually at any point been completely all in. Like I've always used powerlifting as a competitive outlet. And the reason that I got into powerlifting was because I had a bad shoulder injury playing rugby. And I was like, I'm done with rugby because I can't bench press, hurt my shoulder playing rugby. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to pursue this powerlifting thing because it's a way for me to continue training, put on muscle, stay healthy, you know, some outlet to exert, effort and be competitive and, really like release that competitive sort of spirit that I have, which I've always had. And it can still do that just like on my own terms. And I'm
Yep.
totally okay with that. So I think like, what are the keys to longevity, which was the other question, was find out what your quote unquote all in looks like.
Bet.
And
Yep.
like, probably don't go to 100% all the time, but like stay in that bandwidth that's up the top, maybe towards 70 to 90% of what you consider to be all in,
Yeah, it's like a Goldilocks zone.
and just kind of teeter in that zone based on what's going on in your life. Because if you try to be Evie Corrigan and you're not actually committed to being Evie Corrigan and you try to do all of those things, you're going to last like a month.
Yeah. And I think that what that comes back to is knowing yourself. And that's how you know what balance is. And when we addressed balance before, we said, oh, it's this perfect inputs of what you can manage that makes you happy. And it's like, well, that requires you to know all those things you just said about where does powerlifting fit in my life? Where does this sport fit into my life? Is it everything? And I'll make the sacrifices needed to make sure that it can just keep on moving forward like a train. Or is it something that's going to take some stops at points that I'm going to jump off, enjoy aspects of life that are, having kids, going on holidays, doing all these various things that one should be able to enjoy even as an athlete. But what is your mindset? And knowing that about yourself before you think about longevity, like it's almost like don't even think about longevity. Think about like this stage, this
Yeah, yeah.
stage, this stage, stack it, stack it, stack it, stack it. You look back, you're like, I've been doing this for 7 years or
Mhm.
however long. Like I think I surprised myself, a little while ago. Someone goes, oh, how many comps have you done? How long have you been competing? I was like, 2016. Goodness me. I hadn't even really looked back and thought about it, or that I've done however many comps, like 17, 18 comps or whatever it is. That's kind of the essence of longevity. You're not even trying to create it. You're creating it as a byproduct of being nicely balanced pretty well all of the time. Maybe sometimes exceeding that limiter. I think you mentioned like knowing where your bandwidth is, knowing where your zone is. There are times where it is appropriate to exceed that even.
Yep.
And then other times where it's appropriate to be well under it. And that's what it means to be able to stay in it long enough to achieve your optimal.
Yep.
It's kind of like nicely wrapped up version of what we've been saying this whole time.
Yeah, yeah. I think the other key
to longevity is to actually make sure that this is something that you want to do. A lot of people get into powerlifting or lifting weights, and it's fun because they get better quickly. And then when that stops being the case, when it starts to become a real chore to actually put 5 kilos on your total, they fuck off.
100%. I remember someone posted something on social media recently that I really related to about that, which is that compared to other sports, how quickly you kind of fail is a very long time. So you might play rugby, for example, and the first game you might lose. That would be considered a failure. Whereas the first 2 to 3 years, oftentimes in powerlifting, there is some way to define that phase as a win. There's generally that progress that comes a little bit more easily, and you can kind of go to a local comp and like do well, and then kind of progress to maybe a state level or national level, and do relatively well in progress. And it's like, oh, I'm better than I was before. That's a win. That's what powerlifting is. And then at some point, you get hit with that loss. That could be an injury. That could be that you don't progress for a year. That happens all the time. I would say that's relatively normal. And some people might argue against that. But if you look through any world class lifter, you see very long periods of plateau. It is quite normal in strength sports. And that's where a lot of people kind of exit. And I think aligning those expectations to know that that exists and don't live in this fairyland that, oh, I'm just going to keep on progressing like this first couple of years is quite important.
Yeah, and you mentioned this earlier that progress is not linear, and it sort of comes in these little jumps.
Hmm.
It's hard to know at the time when you're in a plateau when that next jump is
Yeah.
coming,
Oh,
but being able to stay in that and continue giving the effort and knowing that eventually that jump is coming, that is extremely important too.
yeah. There's this visual. Some of you have probably seen it, and it's this person who's digging, and they're digging for diamonds, and you have this visual looking in, which is that they're this far away from discovering the diamonds, and they're digging, and they've given up. They've got the shovel in the dirt, and they've given up. No, it's not worth it. And then you got someone else who's kind of made their way through the wall and discovered these treasures. And the idea is you don't know how close you are, and it's that idea you just mentioned of you don't know when that jump's going to come in a plateau. So the best thing you can do is keep enjoying yourself and stay persistent.
Mhm. And if you truly aren't enjoying it, don't do it. Like
Straight.
that's the other thing is like
Yeah.
some people stay in the sport too long because they think, okay, longevity is the key to success. But really, the key to success is sustained enjoyment over a long enough period.
Yeah.
So if you are finding yourself like falling out of love with it, don't hold on because you think you have to, or you think that's the expectation on you, or because you think that that's what other people think that you should do. Should follow your own happiness and joy and pivot towards something that maybe you will enjoy.
The
And then
excellent thing.
if that reaches a point where that next thing that you've selected, you're now not enjoying it, maybe you do come back to powerlifting with a fresher mindset and with a clean slate.
I was going to say the excellent thing about powerlifting is it has that relatively low barrier for entry and re-entry.
Yeah.
So you can kick on and get into more aerobic based stuff, do jiu-jitsu, enter some tournaments, learn something new, keep doing strength training and hypertrophy training in the background. And I've seen it happen before. People come back, their SPD goes up.
Yep.
It's like, okay, and what would the alternative have been? Dragging your feet through this process, maybe not progressing at all because you just hate it, and a sucky few years. So I would definitely encourage people to go away and come back. And then, I have lifters who come to me, and I use that BJJ example. Like Adam Hussein does BJJ. And he started doing that recently. And all it was an alignment of understanding what that meant for him in his powerlifting. That if we balance it well enough, he can get the enjoyment out of it and not lose anything in his powerlifting. Like these are all things that are accessible to powerlifters. Again, because that the amount of hours and inputs is different to other sports, you can have that high like variability. You can be more aerobically based for phases. You can do all these fun things like the culture guys, right? The heavies running, all that sort of stuff. Like, and you're able to engage in that, and it's lovely because we're seeing strong lifters, right, like Charles, getting in and doing that stuff, and then being really strong still.
Yep.
I think that's great for people to see.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it means you can do that if you want to. And it's like, okay, these guys are hitting the nail on the head when it comes to enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. Don't get obsessed with it to the point that you just hate training. At the fundamental level, we start training to be healthy, get stronger, and have fun.
Yep.
Do that. It's kind of one of those things where it gets misconstrued a lot because we now have this social thing, which is social, which is lifting weights, be it social or something that's for yourself, and it's a sport. So it's one of those things where some people get really confused sometimes, where it's like, but I'm lifting, so it's the sport. No, it doesn't have to be that way. You can just lift, and then you can go away from the sport, and then you can come back to the sport, and that's longevity too.
Yeah, not all lifting is powerlifting.
That's it.
Yeah, and I think another thing is you mentioned this is like, why did you start lifting in the first place? That why could be a thing that you return to when things do get stale. Like, why did you get into lifting in the first place? It could have been because you like training your arms. You like how your arms look when you get a pump. Well, fuck, man, go get a pump.
100%.
Go find ways where, that aren't too removed from powerlifting or that aren't, going to make your powerlifting worse, that, you can go and have a good time.
Big time.
All right, Matt, that was great. Good chat. Last thing that you need to do is tell everyone where they can find you.
So pretty much you can find me on Instagram at Matt Bartholomew, or even the Assiduous TP page. Put a bit of content out there and show off the team's wins on that page as well if you're interested to see. And that's about it.
And hopefully you'll see me on there soon.
That's it.